Hey crew, Coach Josh here with GarageGangGyms.com, coming to you with another episode from our Clean series. This is a series. If you haven't seen our first and second episode, please go back. Things that happen in those episodes really inform us for this episode. And you really need to practice some of the things we talked about in previous videos so that this video is only as complicated as it has to be. Because this is one of the more challenging hang variations of the clean. It's going to break us of so many bad habits. It's such a good skill, but it's very complicated. It's the low hang clean. And in this video, we talk about 4 things that cause people to have issues with a full clean. And number 1, that's what your foot pressures are doing from when the bar is below your knee to when it's coming up past your knee or above your knee. Another thing is making sure that your hips aren't coming forward. If you feel like you jump forward in the clean, this drill is really going to put to the test of how well you can control where your hips are moving. We're also going to talk about a cue that you've probably heard a million times. Keep pushing, right? How to actually feel what your coach is telling you when they tell you keep pushing through the ground. Exactly what positions you need to be in so that you feel those legs working the entire repetition. And the most important thing, and then this is actually something we covered in the first episode, is making sure you're active in that turnover, because this bar's in our hands for so long today with this drill that we tend to get tired. We tend to get a little lazy as we go through the extension because we confuse ourselves with thinking, oh, the hang is just us getting to this point, and then from there I don't have to think anymore. And that's not true. So we really ramp up how actively you're racking that bar so that you never have that crash. We never need bruises on our collarbones. So let's talk about the low hang clean. So just like in the last video where we were talking about the hang clean from above the knee, we did all of the previous drills so that we were ready, we were primed, and then we could layer on what the hang meant. So if you haven't seen the hang video or the high hang video that we talked about, you guys can go back. This is part of a series. You can see each step of the way. We talk about hook grip, different back angles, things like that. Go back there. But we are going to use the hang clean that we did in the last video to prime ourselves for the low hang clean. And most specifically, the cue of making sure we lift the bar off of our knees before we do the rest of the clean. So let's review that. So we're going to really bury down into our hook grip, right? I'm really pressing in so my arms are straight. I'm going to be nice and tall. Take my breath. I'm going to bend. I'm going to take it all the way. It's not touching me. And then I'm going to set it on my knee. So just to remind you, from here, we need to make sure we lift the bar first before we bring it back, pushing through the ground, turning it over, and racking that bar. So let's do that a few more times. From the hang, I'm going to lift and go. One more. Lift and go. Now, before we actually take it one step further, which is going past the knee, we're going to take this same drill we were just working on and think about one new thing. And that's making sure as we come up, we're actively thinking about holding our hips right here before we start to really go for it. So as we're lifting the bar and getting it back to our contact point, we want to keep our hips back. The reason for that is if our hips start traveling forward because we're chasing the bar, that means 2 things. 1, we're not being active enough with our arms. And 2, we probably stopped pushing with our legs. And that's going to be really important as we round the knee to be really competent with you continuing to push before we actually go for it. So let's take this again. Try to keep those hips back until that bar makes contact, and then we'll jump. You were probably already doing it, but now we're bringing some attention to it. I'm going to take my breath, chest, hang, keeping my hips back, lift, and rack. Again. And rest. Okay, we'll be talking about that hip cue throughout this entire process because the tendency as we go past the knee, because we're going to be going forward, and we'll talk about this more in a second, because we're going to be going forward, having to come back, our body's natural tendency is to do the opposite, right? Every action has an opposite reaction. So if we go this way, our body's going to be like, well, that's uncomfortable, and it's going to send your hips forward more likely, which is also why We did the hang from here and practiced that for at least a week before we started doing this more complicated skill. In my opinion, the low hang clean, what we're going to be covering today, is actually more complicated than just doing it from the floor. And that's because of this direction change. So us going forward and back, that's going to be a lot harder than when you learn in the next video how to just take it from the floor. Okay? But it's a skill that will help eliminate so many problems in your clean. And the biggest problem is, as you come up, is bumping your knee as you try to clear or going for it too soon. So again, these low hang cleans are such a huge part of learning how to be in the right position and keep your shit together before it's time to actually extend. Okay, so let's talk about the low hang. We're first going to talk about the foot pressure change. So before I grab the bar, with the hang clean, for the most part, our foot pressure didn't change. So we dip, we tip, and we stay pretty much in the same position in our feet, right in the center. Now, you'll learn this more in the next video when we're actually doing the full clean from the floor. When we line up and look down at the bar, we actually bring our whole body weight slightly more toward the ball of our foot off of the ground. The reason for this being, even though it's mechanically more challenging on us, it makes the bar's path a little bit better. It's going to come straight up and then favor back. Rather than if we sat way back on our heels, then we're way out of position and in a terrible position at the top. The clean from the floor is all about making sure we get into the right position easily so that from here we can do everything we talked about in that first video. So there's a foot pressure change. Again, we're going to be from the floor going from the ball of our foot, fading back slightly behind the middle of our foot that we've been comfortable practicing in. We're going to actually be back here just a little bit. As we're getting past the knee, we're going to draw back a little extra. Then learning how to find that same position we've been comfortable with so that all of the previous drills make sense. So let's take the bar and let's practice that. So in reverse, we're going to be in our tall position like we talked about. Our high hang, we're going to tip. The bar's not touching me into my low hang. Still not touching me. I'm going to push my knees back further. I'm going to feel the weight shift to the ball, to the heels of my feet. The bar has now passed my knee. Then what I'm going to do is, because this is really uncomfortable in a compromising position, I'm going to push my knees forward slightly, and this is where we're going to be doing our drill today. Below our knee completely. Not where we take it from the floor, but just below the knee. The tendency, again, is to shift down and back like this, where your shoulders actually come behind the bar. If I turn, you'll see that. So again, as we get past the knee, it's so important that we get over further and then forward so that our body is still in advance of this bar. Then we're going to practice just like we did before with pauses. From here, I'm going to push back through my knees. As my chest comes up, the bar is not touching me. Then as I'm clearing the knee, I need to start lifting the bar by lifting my chest, start pushing through the ground. My glutes and hamstrings are on fire. I make that contact point, and then I can turn it over into my clean. So instead of pausing in the hang position like we've talked about from the last video, we're going to pause in the high hang position. We want to flow through the hang position, because otherwise if we add too many pauses, say we do pause in the hang, we'll have a tendency to set it on our legs, and now we're teaching our body to come past the knee, set it on us, then re-lift it. So again, we're just going to flow through the hang position a little bit faster this time. Nice and tall, big breath. High hang, mid hang, back with my knees, then forward with my knees. From here, I push against the ground. My knees come up, come back, lifting my chest, keep pushing down through the ground. There's my hang, and I can stand up. One more time, a little faster without me talking. Okay. So that's a really hard move. And part of what makes it so hard is this weight is going to be in our hands the longest out of any of the hang variations. It's in our hands a long time. It makes us tired. You can tell I'm a little breathless just from holding that bar, let alone as we do it with weight. But again, to reiterate, and I'll say it again, as we go past the knee, our knees go back, We shift back into our heels slightly, still trying to keep my chest nice and tall. I'm still favoring that hook grip. Once I know I've cleared the knee, I can push my knees forward, keeping my torso at that same angle if I can, or at least as good as I can. Then I'm now somewhat forward in my foot. I'm gonna push back past the knee. My whole torso comes up at the same time. Feel this big tension in my hamstrings. I lift the bar like we talked about in the hang clean. I make contact, I push through the ground, I rack that bar, and then I can stand up. So that's the foot pressure thing. Now let's talk about the cue I've said a few times, even in the last drill, which is keep pushing. If you're in the wrong position, you're not going to be able to keep pushing against the floor. The tendency is your hips are going to have to compensate, which is, again, something we talked about, keeping our hips fixated. If our hips can stay back well enough, we're going to be able to keep pushing with our legs. As soon as our hips come forward and those knees shift forward, it's really hard for me to use my legs anymore, and it becomes more of a kettlebell swing, which we tried to eliminate in that first video. So let's talk about that keep pushing drill. You can do this with the bar. I'm going to. You can do this without the bar. What it really comes down to is taking away the turnover and just doing a low hang deadlift, because this is going to allow us to think about not only the foot pressure a little bit, but also, am I still feeling as if I'm pushing against the platform? So I'm tall, just the deadlift. Tall chest, I'm gonna bend, tip over, bar's not touching me, but I'm still staying up. Knees push back, I go forward. Then from here, I'm gonna take a big breath, chest comes up, pushing against the ground. Okay, my knees shift back, I feel my hamstrings, I'm still pushing. I pass my knees, so I'm gonna lift my chest, I'm still pushing. Still pushing. I'm going to favor that bar back. I'm still pushing, still pushing, still pushing, still pushing. And now my shoulders can come behind the bar. So it touched me and I kept pushing. My chest was still up. My shoulders were still in front of the bar. I kept pushing, kept pushing, kept pushing, kept pushing. And now I finally came behind the bar. And it's in that last moment when your shoulders are about to come behind the bar, like we talked about in that first video, we go through that tall, clean position that we've talked about in the past. But again, we're not turning it over right now. We're just working on feeling our legs. So I'm below the knee again. I take a breath. I push my knees back, but my chest still comes up. I lift the bar past my knees. I favor it back. I'm still pushing. I'm still pushing. My glutes are on fire. Holy cow. And I'm up. One more time, a little faster. Knees back, pushing, and up. And again, that will take us to the third step, or the third cue we talked about, which is making sure those hips stay still. If we go back, now you're just watching me. We're doing this right. As I push and I lift the bar with my whole body to bring it back, as I'm pushing and pulling back, you can see my hips are still way back here. Then as I'm pushing, my hips slowly start to come forward, but I'm in control. And then I can push through the ground and rack. Just like we talked about in that first video, we're not doing this with our hips, because as soon as we do this, I'm in a terrible position to pull that bar vertically because it's going that way. My arms are going to go like this. I'm going to have to pull like that. And again, I'm not able to go down because I want to go forward. So again, check yourself. A good way to make sure that you're not jumping forward is you can actually take some chalk and put it on the ground in a nice line and just stand with that line in the centers of your feet. Then as you go through this drill, you can look down. Did I move forward? Did I move back? Again, a really bad habit is that hip going forward. If you feel like you're jumping forward, go back to that first video and really practice that tall hang position as well as the high hang position so that you can make sure those hips never go forward past your ankles. Okay, before we actually add weight, we just want to reprogram ourselves. We're going to go a little bit faster, but only as fast as we can go so that we feel hamstrings, lift, push. If you start losing those feelings because you're going too fast, this is going to be a terrible drill for you. So the fourth thing that we talked about is making sure we're actively receiving that bar. So this is the first time I'm going to invite you not to squat the bar. We're officially doing a power clean, a low hang power clean. So it's going to look like this. I'm going to actively turn it over. As soon as it hits, as soon as I jump, as soon as I extend, rack the bar, I'm already going to be standing up. So it's going to sound like I'm really stomping my feet, but all I'm trying to do is jump and get my feet right back under me as fast as I can so that I can stand up. So I'm tall, past the knee. I'm going to push back. up, and put my feet down. I racked the bar fast, and I stood up fast. I'm tall, dip, tip, back, lift, push. One more time. Really slow this time. Back, lift, pushing. And nice and fast. Let's add some weight. Okay, so how much weight should I be adding, Josh? Honestly, if this is your first time doing cleans or this skill is really complicated for you, you want to do like 30% to 50% of your max. So if you can clean 200 pounds, we're talking like 95 pounds. Really get this ingrained into your brain. Do sets of 2, do sets of 3, maybe even 5 sets. And next week, worry about adding 10 pounds. And next week, worry about adding 10 more pounds. Your first day, you're already overthinking so many things. As soon as we add weight, you're going to be making all kinds of mistakes. And this is why it's so important you guys video yourself and review it in between your sets, or send it to me at Instagram. I'm more than happy to review that and give you some tips. But it's so important because you might not even be aware that, oh, I jumped forward, or I didn't actually extend all the way. I just kind of did this thing with my arms because I'm thinking about the weight. So again, I want the weight to be enough that you can't just muscle it, but I want it to be light enough that if you happen to muscle it, it's still going to help you understand this movement better. Now, as soon as we do this low hang and go below the knee, people have a tendency to get a death grip on this bar. They're squeezing the crap out of it. All we need to do is make sure that our thumb doesn't let go and that we're favoring towards it. So not that I'm squeezing it a 10 out of 10, I might be squeezing the bar like a 7 or an 8 out of 10. Because number one, it's not that heavy that I need a maximal grip, nor on weightlifting do you ever need a maximal grip, because you're always going to clean way less than you're going to be able to deadlift. So we can be a little bit more lax, and less tension in the arm is going to allow us to pull a little bit easier and more quickly, okay? So we're going to deadlift this bar all the way up, make sure we're in a good position. We're going to slowly go down past the knee, hold that position for a moment, and then it's a slow start. The tendency for people is to just start going for it. And because that bar is actually out in front of you quite a bit, it's going to make it feel like your lower back is being worked a little extra, and it is, because you're in this very compromised position. But again, the tendency is to just go straight up from here and miss all of the things we've practiced up until this point. So we're going to do 2 repetitions at a time. If you're still struggling to re-rack it and go down, you can do 1 repetition at a time. That is perfectly fine. We're trying to learn, not necessarily try to get a workout from 1 set. If you're only doing 1 at a time, do 10 sets of 1, okay? So we'll pick it up. We're going to take our breath, favoring that hook grip. Pause. Reset. And again, check yourself. Are you jumping forward? Are you actually extending? Are you just sneaking under the bar? What's going on? With this exercise, I always want you to add the pause at the bottom. All of the other ones, I said at some point, you could just flow through. It's going to be so long for you before you actually figure out how to go back on your heels a little bit, toward the ball of your foot, back towards your heels a little bit, back into the center of your foot and up. Very complicated. Let's take some of the weight away so that we can always add a pause. That way we get a quick snapshot of where we want to go. We can think one last time. Okay, back, under, go. So the way most people teach cleans or hang cleans or whatever is they always want you to learn the turnover. Maybe you just do a power variation for a while and then eventually learn how to squat. But for me, I always want you to just go into the squat. I want you to be so comfortable that that's what you always fall back onto. Because if you always fall back onto your power, so as the weights get heavier, you're going to try to trick yourself into thinking, I need to get the bar a lot higher than you actually need to. Because you're relying on that power position to rack it rather than your squat position to rack it. Because, again, as it gets really heavy, I want you to always fall back into your squat, especially in the future when you're doing full power cleans from the floor, where you're trying to get that weight up as fast as you can and get under it as fast as you can. I want you missing those reps, not because you didn't get it high enough and you just couldn't simply rack it, but because you were unable to rack it soon enough that it forced you into a squat. If you miss a power clean, it's because you squatted, not because you couldn't rack it, okay? And this is gonna help you learn how to do it that way. Now, because again, our fourth thing we wanna work on is making sure that we're actively racking this bar. After you've gotten really confident in squatting the bar, now let's take the squat away and see if through the extension, we get that bar traveling fast enough and in a straight enough line and slightly favoring towards us, that we are able to get under the bar fast enough and stand up immediately without having to squat the bar. So in this case, the power clean is actually much more difficult than the squat clean, as it always should be. So let's do that. A low hang power clean. The tendency, because you know you got to get the bar higher and you got to move faster, is to skip a step or to rush through a step. It needs to be exactly the same, except when you get to this position and you've extended and you're pulling under, you just got to be extremely fast. You can't be lazy with it anymore because we're not squatting. We open. Okay, here we go. And if you do it right, you shouldn't be jumping forward. As soon as you extend, you should feel yourself pulling under, and the bar should only be dropping on your shoulders 1/4 of an inch. We only need to create a little space between us and the bar so that as we turn and push those elbows forward, it lightly lands onto us. The more distance there is, because we're inactive, if I pull it way up here and I'm trying to catch it way down here, that's a big distance that bar is going to crash on me. Again, that's something we covered in the first video. Go back there and learn how to be active when you turn it over. So there you have it, guys. The low hang clean. Very, very complicated skill, but it's so important that you understand and master the low hang clean because it really works with transitioning around the knee, just like I talked about. That is usually where people screw themselves up for the entire clean. So if you can get better at getting around the knee, you are going to have a much heavier clean. You're going to be more athletic. You're going to jump higher, run faster, do all the things that you're coming to the gym to get better at. So if you like this video, please hit like, subscribe to this channel so that you can see the next episode where we're taking it off the floor and putting it all together before we start diving into some more advanced cues and tactics for that clean. So this is Coach Josh with GarageGangGyms.com. I'll see you guys next time.